This is the second. This is the first event of the second New Zealand Music Producer Series. I just want to make a couple of acknowledgements before we start. I'd like to acknowledge our partner, Recorded Music New Zealand, who have come in with us on this event to make this happen, and our sponsors, NZNair and APRA AMCOS, but also SAE Auckland, who have sponsored these evening seminars. Also thanks to Roundhead Studios, Neil and Charlotte and Paddy and Simon for helping us move the event here, because we had too many people for the other places. Just want to tell you a little bit about the New Zealand Music Producer Series. The idea behind it is to bring producers of David's calibre to New Zealand to work and interact with members of the recording industry. And we've also got another producer, Ramesh Donangoda, coming over next week. And we've got a seminar with him at Recorded Music New Zealand next Monday evening at 7 p.m. So we've got limited places for that. So if anyone wants to go to that, if they can go on the Recorded Music New Zealand website and put their name down for that seminar as well. If you're going to do any hashtags or photos or anything tonight, hashtag NZ Producer Series is the hashtag for the event. Feel free to mention it, or or sort of post any photos, do any tweets, or whatever you want to do. I'd like to welcome David Wrench here for this seminar, and I'm really pleased we can get David here. And took a fair bit of organising with his busy schedule, but we've managed to make it. So I'll give you a bit of background on David first. David began his career as a recording artist, releasing several solo albums before moving on to become house engineer at Bryn Derwent Studios in North Wales, engineering for artists such as Bat for Lashes, Everything, Beth Orton, James Yorkson and Julian Cope. He's since become an in-demand mix engineer with a wide range of artists, including the XX, Frank Ocean, Goldfrapp, FKA Twigs, Sampha, Hot Chip, Jungle, Glass Animals, White Lies, Bloc Party, Blossoms, Caribou, and a whole lot more. He mixed 4 of the 12 albums nominated for the 2017 Mercury Music Prize, including the winning album Processed by Sampha. He also won Mix Engineer of the Year at the 2016 Music Producers Guild Awards. It's quite impressive. And that's not to mention the BBC Wales C2 Best Producer Award that you won, I think, every single year that you actually it was awarded. Right. So David, welcome. Welcome to New Zealand.
Hello.
And,
yeah, it's good to be here.
I always knew you as an artist before you were a producer.
Yeah.
Have you always seen yourself as an artist who produces or a producer who performs? Or do you feel there's no real barrier between the two disciplines?
I think they really mix. In that, I always saw myself as a musician first, and I sort of came at producing from out of necessity, really. Which wasn't done as much back in the time. This was sort of back in the 80s, so that wasn't done as much then. Now I think that's a course that most people take, is if they do music, they'll have a laptop, they'll work out how to do a bit of production. But then it was very much you'd be in a band and then you'd go into a studio and you'd let someone else do that. But I was always quite interested in that side of it. And in the school I went to, they had someone that was quite forward-thinking, and they set up a tiny little studio with a 4-track and a drum machine and a couple of mics and a synth, and I used to spend every dinner time in there. So it was just figuring out how all that worked, and it's just as a way of making music. And because no record label was interested, I thought I'd better do it myself. So that was definitely, it was definitely from that it came.
So you feel it was, being an artist was the bridge to being a production rather than a producer?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the way the music industry is moving, do you still think there's a place for a traditional record producer, or do you feel that there are so many artists now that are self-producing? Do you think that's the way that the industry is going?
I think it requires a bit of both. I think it's been amazing what's happened the last few years with how the tools to be able to make a record have opened themselves up to most people. But there's a skill level that's not always there, and a level of expertise where focusing on production for years, you can bring something new to it. And if it comes to traditional instruments or acoustic instruments like drums, pianos, string sections, I think that there's definitely, you can hear a difference when it's been recorded by someone that knows what they're doing. and someone who's maybe learning what they're doing. But as with anything, it's always about how it sounds. So you could record a string section for the first time and get an amazing result if you listen and move stuff around right and sort of self-critical about it. And sometimes it's definitely about judgment more than, say, equipment or technique, I think. But there's certain situations where having good microphone technique, good recording technique will enable you to get the result you want out of a situation that's quite tricky.
I mean, so how did you learn basic engineering skills? Was that when you were a house engineer at Brynderwyn?
Sort of, yeah. I sort of blagged it a bit, and I'm self-taught. But I had a physics teacher when I was in school who had a little studio. So this is Gorwell Owen, who you'll know.
Right. How Gorwell was your... Right.
He was my physics teacher.
He's quite a famous Welsh record producer, Gorwell. There are a few of us around.
And he had this like tiny studio above a post office, and he knew that's what I was interested in, and he was releasing quite weird experimental Welsh records in the Welsh language at the time. And I'd just go up there and hang out and watch him work. He had a little Soundcraft desk and a 16-track 1-inch recorder. And yeah, I'd watch the process and was just interested in it and just ask him what various bits did. And so yeah, that I learnt a bit there, and then a bit just from experimenting. And then I had in the school and college I was in, they had an Atari with Cubase on it, or Notator, and the very early just MIDI sequencer, and I learnt that. And then I went off and did my own music for years and didn't really think about it much. And I'd befriended the owner of a residential studio in Wales called Brynderwyn, and it was tiny when I first went there, and he was just about to expand it a bit. And I asked if I could come and do some engineering, and he asked if I knew what I was doing, and I said yes, even though I didn't. And then like my first few weeks was just helping him paint the place. And then, yeah, he just sort of said, there's a session next week if you want to do it. I thought, okay. So I borrowed the manual for the mixing desk and the manual for the tape machine, read them both, and went in for one day to just check I knew what I was doing. And then the next day I was on a session with a band and
was that the band with the enormous drum kit?
Yeah, it's huge. I've never seen such a big drum kit. It's like a whole scaffolding with about 10 toms and loads of cymbals and a drummer that couldn't play and that was hitting them everywhere. It's like, I just thought, I'm not sure if this job's for me.
But I guess they're the ones that you learn on, obviously.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And we were talking earlier today about the benefits of always saying yes, even if you don't think you'll be able to do it. If you just say yes, you'll just figure out a way to make it happen. You know, I think it's kind of important career-wise, just to not, especially early on, not to turn anything down.
Yeah.
But you end up in situations with crazy drum kits and
But yeah, you just learn very quickly. I was just thrown right in on it, and yeah, I just had to learn and sort of bluff that I knew what I was doing, so that there was some confidence. But
I mean, I guess the benefits of of having to learn on the job and also learning by ear is that you don't learn ways not to do things.
Yeah,
you you just figure out how to do things yourself, and you just have to use your ears in order to make the record sound good.
Yeah, and it was quite interesting that when I then started working with producers, sometimes producers would come in and I'd assist, and I'd be, oh, they're using the same drum techniques I'm using. And it was just that I'd arrived at them through trial and error, so sort of knew why I was using that technique. And it turns out that they are the techniques, but that people learn. So it's quite reassuring that it's obviously figuring out how to do it properly, but just taking a bit longer through trial and error, really.
So obviously, most people know your work through your mix work.
Yeah.
So, how and why did you make the transition from engineering and tracking into mix work?
Well, it was a bit different then, because when I first came into doing this job, it was late 90s, and especially on independent projects, you wouldn't really have a separation between a producer and a mixer. if you were producing a record, especially like a more budget indie record, you'd produce and mix. It wouldn't go to someone different to mix it. It was just a different sort of culture that was about then. So it was something I had to learn to do anyway. Because if you're going to produce a record, you like 95% of the time you were going to mix it. And I'd noticed from being around other producers when I was assisting that they often got really freaked out when it came to the mixing bit, and there was a panic would set in, and they'd start getting flustered and start making weird decisions. So I thought, oh, this is like, seems silly. It's a part of the process you've got to go through. It can't be that, it can't be rocket science. It must be, So I thought, well, I'm going to figure this out. And I thought the way to figure it out was to compare what I was doing really harshly against records that I thought sounded really good. So got a record player in the studio, and I just A/B a lot. I just have a little rack of records that I knew sounded amazing, whether they be like more folky things that I was recording a lot at the time, things like Astral Weeks or Joni Mitchell records, or like Stevie Wonder records, just Michael Jackson records that you just know sonically sound amazing wherever you play them. They just sound good. And I'd just compare and be like, well, is what I'm doing as good as that? No, it's not. So I've got to work on it a bit more. And it's...
Was it a bit depressing at the start to sort of...
Yeah, well, you learn quite a lot straight away, I think, about especially like bass end and vocal placement. And you think, oh yeah, I'm not placing vocals anywhere near in the right, place. And another thing you think, oh yeah, it's actually that's sounding all right, compared to that.
And how long was that process of?
I still do it.
Still,
I still do it. Yeah, all the time.
But before you felt that you could, that you felt comfortable when to really make a difference on mixing people's records.
I think the confidence comes with hearing it on the radio or hearing your work on the radio, and it's sounding good compared to other things. Hearing it in a club and it's standing out. And that's when I felt like, oh, okay, I think I feel more confident in my own judgments with this now.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would have been the first record that you mixed that you really felt kind of was representing, that you'd done a really good job on?
There was an album on Domino Records, this Scottish folk artist called James Yorkston.
Right.
And it was produced by Kieran Hebden, who goes the name of Fortet. And that was the first time we'd worked together. He came up to the studio and we just hit it off. And we sort of mixed it as we went. We'd sort of do a track, add some things to it, and then we'd do a mix in the evening. And we were just mixing as we were going, as we were tracking. And at the end, we listened, it just sounded really good. And I thought, oh, this is... Yeah. And I still think that record sounds really good. It was all done on tape. It was all... Yeah, it just sounded good, and I felt quite confident that we'd done a really good job on that one. Yeah. And it was actually off the back of that Kieran, who was really close friends with Dan from Caribou, suggested that we start working together, that Dan needed help bringing his sound together in the mix stage, and then that's where a lot of the other work came from, was from the work I did with Caribou.
So when we were talking a few days ago, you were telling me about sort of like a seminal period in your sort of career as a mix engineer. Yeah. And and there were several records that all came out at the same time. So which records were those? And
well, I think the big turning point came about 2 or 3 years before that led to me getting those records. So that there was like one track, this track Odessa by Caribou, and that was the one that really suddenly changed everything. Right. Well, it was quite slow because we did that track together, and we did it in quite a weird way, in that we did a mix and brought it out on the desk. So I wasn't in the box at that point, and we did it on the desk, and we got a mix that we were happy with, and then we started running off weirder and weirder mixes, like dub mixes, and sort of really play with it and get quite creative with it and just add loads of effects in. And if there were any magic moments in those, we'd chop them in to the main mix. So the main mix is like a collage of like 4 or 5 different mixes, some of which were quite wild and some of which were, most of which was the straight mix. So it's got this sort of movement to it. But yeah, so that record came out, and initially not much happened with it. And I was like, oh no, this is like such a good record. Why isn't it? So here we go again. And then in the meantime, had a period with hardly any work, and I thought, I'm going to give up on this. And I was offered a job teaching. Maybe I'll take it. And then a friend of mine told me to go and look in the mirror, and I should realise I'm unemployable outside of music. So to not even think about it. So I thought, okay, I'll stick with this for a bit. And then that track, weirdly, about 9 months later, really started to pick up and was everywhere. And the album was everywhere, and it was like the Rough Trade Album of the Year and things like that.
Right.
And then, yeah, suddenly started getting more and more and more offers just on the back of that one track, really. So, yeah.
And so what albums came out of that? Offers came out of that?
Well, eventually it was so. Yeah, there was a period then a couple of years later where there was a whole run of records which definitely, I was sort of working on them all at the same time. So there was the first Glass Animals album, but I'd been sort of talking to them for a while, for about a year beforehand. Nobody wanted to sign them in Britain. Everyone had passed on them. And me and their manager just thought they were amazing, and I thought there was something about him. So I just started working with them for free because I just thought there was something about them. And eventually they found out Paul Epworth was starting a label. He heard them and liked them and put them out. And yeah, by the time the album came out, there was definitely more of a buzz about them, and it ended up doing incredibly well in America after quite a long. It was another one that took like a year or so of being out before anyone really noticed it, and then it went crazy in America, and now they're playing like insane shows in America.
Yeah.
But so there was that, and then at the same time, the band Jungle had their first album, and they were big fans of the Caribou record I'd done, so they wanted to work, and I did a trial, and it went well, and so we did that album, and then FKA Twigs. I got these demos sent. I just thought, I've never heard anything like that. I don't understand this at all. I really want to do it. And I hadn't heard anything like it. And she's amazing.
Because it's such an influential album.
Yeah.
That I know a lot of sort of young producers and engineers.
Yeah.
They use it. They use a lot of tracks like that as reference tracks, and it's become it comes up a lot in conversation.
Yeah. It was a complicated record because she worked with lots and lots of people. So she's like a producer on all of it, but she works with co-producers. And so it arrived in all sorts of states from different people in different file types, things with half the vocals had reverbs and effects printed on them. There's like edits in them. It was chaotic. And everything sounded, when I first heard all the rough mixes, it all sounded like really different tracks, very different styles. So the brief was, can you mix this so it sounds like a record? So it sounds like one, find what the identity of it is and bring it into one thing. So, yeah, that was the
I guess that's
key.
a problem with a lot of multi-producer records.
Yeah.
I've certainly had that issue in the past where a lot with, if you've got lots of songwriters on a record, or if you've got lots of different producers on a record, trying to find something cohesive. And I guess that's, that is your job as a mix engineer, to try and find that.
Yeah, seeing what the essence is, what the real spirit of the record is, and Twigs is really, really involved in the mixing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much, is she there all the time when you're mixing, or
not all the time? I mean, I need some time alone just to get back. I think you've always got to have a starting point to play an artist. I think it's quite tricky going straight in.
Yeah,
because there's also the danger if you're not used to the mix process. You can be focusing in on stuff too early on. It's good to come to something where at least it's one person's vision, and then from there we discuss. But at least there's one coherent vision to start with. Otherwise, it can. But yeah, we had a good working process, and I mean, she's fascinating in that she doesn't write or think like most of the musicians. because it's very much about movement.
Well, she's a
dancer, and so a lot of the music is orchestrating her movement. So things like panning will be very specific. She goes, oh no, that has to pan there because that's when my hand flicks that way. And so it's really, and it all makes total sense when you see it in the videos and you see her dancing to it. Stuff is following how she's moving, how she's feeling. So it's
a pretty unique approach.
It's totally different. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And
it's a stunning record. That was really the first time I suddenly clicked in that the fact that you were working on records of that caliber, because I'd always known you as you were always around as an artist and as a producer, and it was like I remember hearing that record and it's like, this sounds incredible, and I was like, I wonder who mixed it, and then holy shit, it's Dave Wrench. It's like it was such a
she's definitely really special. And the other thing was to try and get it really hard and biting, but to not sound like an R&B record.
Yeah.
It almost had to be more hip-hop in the way that it attacked, even though it had these beautiful melodies on it, and stuff can like really leap out and be sort of uncomfortable. But I really like that. I was like a big fan in mixes of everything not just sitting comfortably. Those are sort of mixes that just like, I just don't really have an interest in that.
I've noticed in your mixes in general, there's a lot of movement in the mixes, and like the XX record was, there was a lot of movement in that, and it was like, it's quite an enjoyable sort of headphone experience. I found a lot of your work, So
I quite like setting something, or even just to not be tasteful about it, whether it's just something leaping out a bit too much, or something suddenly disappearing a bit, and you've got to follow it, or something that makes you work a bit while you're listening to it, or surprises you a bit, and that's what makes that always feels exciting to me.
Do you feel that mix engineers in general aren't brave enough?
I wouldn't say it, but I don't comment.
I
don't comment on other people's work. But I know for me, it's got to be exciting.
Do you wish people were braver with their approaches to?
Yeah, I think I enjoy it when people are brave. Definitely. Yeah. And I learned a lot of that from. I had this slightly strange session with Julian Cope, who's a really unique artist.
Yeah.
And he came in. He came in to record a heavy metal album, which isn't his main genre at all. But he had this band called Brain Donor, and they all. Oh, my chair is slowly sinking. They all wore huge boots and full makeup for the full session. 3 double neck guitars, and it was all, But we did this, and every night at about 3 a.m, we were putting down a rough mix, and it was chaotic. And he'd be like, "Oh, turn the guitar up 9 dB, pan it left. No, I mean right." And we'd record this down, and towards the end of the week, I was like, "Oh, when are you going to mix this?" And he goes, "Oh, you've just mixed it." He was like, "Oh, fuck, what? This is insane. You can't use this." And that's how it came out. And I couldn't listen to it for 2 or 3 years. I was like, no, this is... And then I put it on. I thought, "Oh, this is really exciting." And it was like, "Whoa, this guitar solo is brilliant. It comes in 9 dBs louder than you'd want it to, and it pans left and it pans right, and then it disappears." And it's like, I thought, "Oh, this is great. I need to do this more." So. He was quite right about it.
He is a genius. And I quite enjoy his books on sort of like ancient stone circles.
Oh yeah, he's brilliant.
He's a great British eccentric, really, isn't he? Yeah.
He's got 2 rules which I've learnt so much from, and one is that in a live take, if someone makes a mistake, his first instinct isn't to sort of go and redo it. It's, "Oh, can we just orchestrate that to make it fit in?" So he'll see, "Oh, what if we put some harmonies on that? Will it work? Or if we put something else out of time there as well, will it work?" And so there's these amazing moments on his records where like weird chords come in or weird things happen, and it's just from a mistake, and embracing it and building something out of it. It's brilliant.
So a Bleak strategy about honouring that error as a hidden intention kind of thing. Yeah.
And then his other method is he pulls out a USB stick and says, "Oh, just put that in," and it's just got a wav of an explosion on it. And he said, "If you put that really loud there, no one's going to notice the mistake."
I mean, it's pretty lateral thinking, isn't it? Really,
it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So occasionally on his records, huge explosions happen.
But now every time we listen to it, we know there's a mistake in there, so you're trying to find the mistake.
Or sometimes he just likes them for effect as well.
Right. We were having a chat earlier about the mix you did for Frank Ocean. I'm not sure how much you can tell me and how much you can't tell me, but I think it's sort of like it's quite an interesting story.
Oh, about
about how you got the mix and where you were at the time. And
I was just at a party, and I was a bit drunk, and I had this message from a friend, a mutual sort of someone in the music industry who just said, Frank Ocean's just asked for your number. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. And then I get a text from him saying, oh, I've got this track, would you be able to mix it, like, now? So, okay. So then the track comes in, get in the studio, mix it, send it, and
there was no rough mixes of it?
No rough mixes, just hundreds of tracks. It was just like a massive, it was the track, it was the track Self-Control of Blonde. And I didn't, there was all this anticipation at the time that the album was going to drop any minute. So, okay. So I handed in the mix, and I had to go off to a festival to do a talk similar to this. And I said, well, I hope everything's all right. And I came back from the festival having had no reception. The album had already come out the next day. So,
so the mix was literally the day before you...
The mix, I'd handed it in the morning, the record came out.
So no pressure. I guess
I didn't know.
It was a good thing you were away at Green Man, wasn't it?
Otherwise,
you'd have been, there's kind of stress levels of...
there's definitely some stress levels there.
So, I mean, how did you... When you're confronted with like 100 tracks of material you don't know and no monitor mix, how did you even start at that point? Did you leave stuff out, or did you just...
I always figure with that, I used to panic a bit more with that, with the worry of pressing send on a trial mix or the first work with someone, especially when they just say, do your thing. He's like, I don't know what you want.
Explosions.
Yeah, I don't know what you want on it. But I think that's when you have to just trust instinct and not... The worst thing you can do is try and second guess what they want. I always figure if someone's come to me, they want me to do what I do. And I'll just trust my instinct. I'll make it so I like it. And if they like it, cool.
There's definitely a stress to sending a mix to an artist. And it doesn't matter how many records I make, I still get stressed when I hit send.
It's definitely...
Because you just think, how much pain is there going to be post this?
Yeah.
Is this the start of a really painful experience?
Exactly.
Or is it going to be like really joyous and they love the first thing you do? Do you want
I'm up again.
We've got a chair emergency here, Simon.
No, I'm good now.
Okay.
There's definitely a stress to it. I still get it. And it's...
I think it's good.
Every
I think
time.
a bit of fear is a good thing.
It is.
I think it's But I totally agree with the idea of it's so easy to try and second guess what the label want, what the artist want, and it's like, where do you stop? At some point, you've got to go with your own instinct about what's going to be the right thing. And I guess that you're in that probably an enviable position for a lot of mix engineers, that people they come to you because they want you to.
Yeah, but it's also, I think it's really important that the artist feels free and comfortable to... Oh, cheers. Thank you. No,
That's a much better chair.
It's way nicer.
Why didn't you get that chair in the first place?
No, it's cool. Thanks. It's important that the artist doesn't feel that they can't tell me what they think, even if they don't like it.
Right.
I always see like the first draft as the starting point and a way of an opening to the discussion about it. So I'll do what I think is right. I know it's not going to. Every now and again you get a first draft that makes the record, but it's rare.
Yeah.
It's usually quite a few down the line for it, and I definitely like to have a discussion with the artist. And whenever I can, I like the artist to come into the studio with me. I don't like doing it all remotely and not having any contact and not having a discussion and not finding out what it is that they want. And I think you can be more creative with an artist in the room.
And I think that's the way it used to be. I'd always have artists at least in the building, so you could have the discussion and make changes. And and now it seems to be a lot of remote mixing. It's like, and I just think it is really healthy to have communication. Is such an important part of making records.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to. I think we're old school enough to be able to speak to people one on one rather than do everything remotely. And it's
and also try things. So if you've got a wilder, I think it's different how people accept ideas as well and how they bring them. So if I was to send a mix with some crazy effect on it back, people go, oh, what have you done? Why is this? Whereas if you're in a room and you go, okay, well look, this isn't working. I'm not feeling this happening. Can we explore a way of making it work? And we'll try this and we'll come to some crazy effect together. Psychologically, that's such a different thing.
Yeah.
And you can go a lot further with that and make more interesting decisions than if it's just remotely. And also, you never know what someone else is listening to a mix on. And even though it should sound right on everything, sometimes people are listening on something really odd. And you're getting mixed comments back when people are... literally, I've had mixed comments back. I'm thinking, this doesn't make any sense. But like about the stereo field, and yet when I find out what they're listening to, and it's a mono system.
Yeah.
So, and it's... Because a lot of things like those Sony Sonos things are essentially mono, and so it's.
I remember the boys from Future Cut telling me about they had a call from the label when they were doing the Lily Allen record saying, "There's no bass in this. Where's the bottom end? Well, what you listen to on my computer?
Well,
that's on the laptop speaker.
That's actually, but that's something that happens quite a bit.
Yeah,
I've had to figure that one because it's. That happened a couple of times, and I thought, actually, I've got to find a way around this. There must be a way of getting more bass. And so now I do actually listen on laptop speakers and try and make sure I've got bass coming out of them.
Right.
Because...
and how would you achieve that with,
I actually I'd nearly always start adding in harmonics
right.
of bass stuff, because like pure bass tones, and especially electronic music, it's so key to how it all sits together that you've got that bass end there. And I always mix with a sub, really quite loud, so I can feel it, how it's going to be in a club. But it's also got to be on a laptop. So often I'm having to distort it a bit and add a bit of, just subtly add harmonics in, subtly do something, so that when you listen on a laptop speaker, you still get a feeling of what those bass notes are. Right. So it doesn't...
I guess because you just lose all structure of what the chords are and everything. Exactly. You don't have that,
Yeah, and with a bass, with a dance music, it's what's driving it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So, and people listening on mono iPhones. And, you've sort of got to... Even though I was initially like, oh, this is crazy, but actually this is practical, real-world situation. Mixes have got to now... do this.
I guess you can approach it two ways. One is the purest way, or one is that I'm not going to address the way that technology is changing.
Yeah.
It's like the way you listen to music and the way that sort of if you're going to have if you're going to be working in the industry currently, you have to be able to move with technology and figure out ways to get around it.
Yeah, if that's what people are listening.
Or just be like me and moan about it and say back in the old days it was much better. Can we have a bit of a chat about the Sampha album, because it apparently took a long recording process. Was it another multiple producer album that was?
No, it was him and Roddy, but over a period of maybe 7 years.
Right.
But I think it was mainly the last 3 or 4 years that it was properly worked.
Still a long time.
It's a long
3
time.
or 4 years. Yeah.
I mean, he had his mum died in that time, which is like a lot of the lyrics on the album are about that.
Yeah.
And there was some family stuff, and so there were definitely breaks in it, and like some quite long breaks in it.
Because had you worked with him on another project, all right?
No, but we'd been talking before it came to the mix. I'd sort of met him about a year before. I'd gone in, and he'd played me Where It Was All At, and we just sat and chatted. I thought it sounded amazing, like really, like wow, it's like so beautiful. And he's such a lovely person. He's got the nicest way about him. He's very gentle and gentle and really intense in a really good way.
Yeah.
And he played me stuff, and there was lots of this sort of. It was fascinating, like how he was playing essentially Cora parts, but on a DX7. I'd never heard anything quite like it. It was really beautiful, and yeah, and then he was just working on it bit by bit, and I'd get sort of files through every now and again just to have a listen to. And then finally he was like, okay, it's ready.
So you waited till that point before you actually started mixing.
Yeah.
It wasn't an ongoing process of mixing as well as
No,
tracking.
it was, yeah, once it was there, it was there. And then I think we did, I can't remember what the Plastic, I think was the first track, Timmy's Prayer. I think they were the first ones that did. Yeah.
And there's a lot of space on that record. You know, there's a lot. You know, it's. I guess that's it's a real art being able to maintain that space. It's so easy to fill records up.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, did that change your approach to the way you mixed it, and the fact you had to come at it a different way, or did you start it like you wouldn't start?
I knew it had to be quite true to what he'd done, but it needed to sit as a record.
Yeah.
And there were bits of it when it came to me that just felt a bit muddy, and I could hear all these parts in there when I looked at it. So it needed to be separated, but still feel quite cohesive and not too clinical, and have its warmth, and have also the dynamic. So like the trickiest track on the record to mix was Blood on Me, which has got this amazing sort of drum beat on it. Yeah. And it's really, I could only mix it in short bursts because it's so frantic as my heart was going, because the whole thing's like this dream sequence of being chased by these hoodies. I was like, I'd mix for about 10-20 minutes, and I was like, okay, I've got to have a cup of tea and chill, and then I'll come back to this. But I guess that's like, there's something about his vocal on that just has this urgency in it, and it's someone scared, someone on edge, and he's really captured it. So.
I mean, do you find now you're mixing in the box as opposed to doing desk mixes that that is, you find you working more sort of switching between tracks rather than kind of like because we used to have to sort of just be sitting there until one track was finished before we could move on to the next one. I do like that ability to be able to kind of switch between songs and depending on what sort of mood it is. I guess that would be a good example of that.
I definitely do a bit of that. I'll work on a track until I think it's pretty much there. Then I'll often have a nap. With the track on loop, just for 10 minutes, and I'll wake up and I'll have some more ideas for it and I'll do a bit more. And then I'll leave it for the day and I'll come back to it first thing in the morning with like really fresh ears. Right. And then there'll always be a few things. And it's after that I press send and bounce it down and send it off.
So is the napping like a really important part of the process?
Yeah.
I think
swear by it.
Beyond 40 afternoon naps are essential for any recording process.
No, definitely swear. Just by, I think, or just a really relaxed listen, just putting it on loop and just chilling out, listening to it, just letting it soak in. And it's weird how things then suddenly like, it's like, shit, that tambourine's like 10 dBs too loud. Why didn't I notice it? It's a weird thing. So you just don't notice until you really just switch off.
I always used to find, when we were mixing old school, on desk mixes, and you'd be on it all day, and then you'd go into the car and you would put a CD or cassette on or something. This is how long ago it was, and you'd be like, I've just missed a whole part out. Yeah, I've been listening to this song all day, and I've missed like an essential guitar part or a backing vocal. It's so amazing that you'd be so focused in the studio that you just. Something really obvious will just the next day you'll find it's something really obvious that's wrong with the mix, and it's just I could never figure out why that was when you were so focused on something.
It's fascinating how you I always have 3 sets of speakers set up, like my main monitors, another pair of like good monitors, and then a tiny radio, and I'm often just going through just listening. Half the day is just spent listening, and then going in and doing all the tweaks, and then
So, while we're discussing that, we should probably get into a little bit of tech time, bit of tech talk. So, do you want to tell us about the setup you've got in your studio in London? Now you've got your own, because you've had your own setup for a while now, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. So I've got a little studio up in Wales where I live, but now I'm mostly in London, partly so I can do the thing of having artists come in, because it's just more central. If I've got a room there, people can just pop in, and I'm set up without a desk, but with got some Neumann monitors and a sub. I definitely find a sub really useful because I'm working on so much electronic music. hearing what's going on right down low is sort of essential. Because when you take it into a club, those are really pushed, those frequencies. So you've got to know that everything's sitting all right down there. Half of what I do is just tiny bits of EQ around the bass end of stuff. Like, just so it's even, so like the kick and bass are all sitting right together. And just getting that really clean and punchy is like a huge part of the mix. And so, so having a sub, which I'm almost sat on top of, it's really close. I've got main monitors up there. And I've got some outboard in there as well.
Do you use a lot of do you use them, or you tend to mainly stick to plugins these days?
Mainly plugins, but I do run out through certain things. Like, I quite like doing a pass of real tape echo, where I'm playing with it for different parts of the song, just tightening it up, opening it up, sort of maybe at the end of line adding a bit more feedback in. It just feels more something about having the actual movement
like
of
space
it
echo or something.
Yeah, I've got space echo, and I essentially use that. Some spring reverbs, something about them.
And do you stripe all that back into Pro Tools? I take it you Pro Tools is your...
Yeah, Pro Tools.
Is that mainly because most artists record Pro Tools and the format's easier? Or
No, I mean, it's like a lot of the artists I work with use Ableton, really.
Yeah.
But, or Logic. And that definitely... Yeah, we'll get into that. Maybe the whole thing of going from one to the other, it can be tricky sometimes. But, I mean, Pro Tools, it's just because... Well, when I started in a studio, it was tape. I'm probably the last generation that started on tape. But after about 3 or 4 years, Pro Tools was really taking hold, and that just became the standard in recording studios. Yeah. So that's what I learned. And I've never really learnt anything else, just Pro Tools. So,
are you do summon mixers at all?
No, right. I've tried. Actually, on the last Caribou record, on the Our Love record, we tried summing, and we did some blind listening, sort of AB,
right?
Actually, ABX tests. We went really serious about it, and it was tough. We could just about hear the difference, and we preferred the in the box.
Right.
So there was a tiny bit more top end on the in the box. Other than that, we weren't really feeling. It was. It certainly wasn't worth the hassle.
Yeah.
We didn't feel we were gaining anything, and it was just going to take longer. So.
And I guess the more output you use, and the more issues you get when you're having to do stems. I would imagine for a lot of the artists you work with, you have to do a lot of stem work.
A lot of stems.
Yeah.
I mean, I have an assistant who does that now, but yeah.
We were chatting earlier as well about especially with self-produced artists, the issues with file management.
Yeah.
Obviously a bit of a dry subject, but I get, I certainly find it's a big problem because now you're working with artists who are sort of self-produce.
Yeah.
Just trying to sort of, I mean, things come to you in a pretty. Although I have seen your sort of your management send out session requirements for how the file should be set up, including color code and everything and the right colors, but I guess it is a problem.
Yeah, it's tricky, but I do like working with self-producing artists, and I think, I mean, actually, a lot of what I do is that because it's electronic music, so that'll mainly be. Well, a lot of it's electronic music, but so most of that will be self-produced artists, and maybe not recorded in the most hi-fi of ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes there'll be issues with the files that, well, sometimes they can be fixed, sometimes they can't. You just got to live with it. And so, some of it is talking through with the artist how to export it, because it can be tricky when you've got all sorts of side chaining, weird effects going on. But I need a clean vocal. I mean, I might need a dry vocal, clean dry vocal to be able to clean it up, get rid of all the sounds and weird edits and drop-ins. But there's something about an effect that they're using that's intrinsic to the song. Say that first Jungle album has just got like a Leslie effect on all the vocals, and like taking that off, it doesn't sound like them. So you've got to export. Sometimes even, I think with that, I cleaned up the vocals and give it back to them. They ran it through their effects. I got it back again. I think on the Caribou record, there were the last Caribou record, there's phases that he'd put on there that I just was never going to be able to replicate.
Right.
Because it's like a complex chain, some of the plugins I didn't have in Pro Tools.
Right.
And so we'd bounce stuff back and forth, stuff with some stuff wet, some stuff, often quite like wet stems, dry stems. I'll listen. And I have an assistant, and she tends to like talk with the artist, make sure we've got all the parts, checks it against rough mixes. So before it's got to me, a lot of this has been sorted, and I've got options, and I know how it's going to come in, and we're going to sort it. So yeah.
Do you have any sort of like go-to plugins that pretty much appear on everything that you do?
Yeah, definitely. Although they change, I quite like to sometimes like force myself to not use something, and all that. If I'm, I hate having like preset type things.
So I think you kind of go through that thing where you use something a lot. I know I've done it, and then you don't use it for another 3 or 4 years, and you go back and listen to the record and go, "Oh, that was a really good idea. I don't do that anymore." You just kind of get bored yourself with certain things.
Yeah, I always feel like I've got to try something new out, or I quite like trying new plugins out. And seeing what there is.
Is there anything you can't manage without?
I think with mixing, it's so much about your judgment and your ears and just achieving what you want to hear to your taste, that I'd sort of like to think I could do a good mix on anything, that it's not about being beholden to one type of equipment or a plugin. I'm sure I can do a good mix on the desk or in the box, or as long as you're using that. That's half the thing with the going in the box for me, was like, well, I'll just tweak it until it sounds right, whether it's on a desk or in the box. And I don't feel that there's any limit from the technology that stops you being able to tweak it. It'll just sound different with both, but you probably get to the same sort of result. Yeah. If you're going by your taste, whichever you're using. Yeah. Maybe the desk doesn't have as much top, but I'll probably add more top in it. Yeah. And I won't add as much in the computer. I mean, I guess
there's really no argument anymore as far as like the workflow of working in the box. It's just in the modern music industry is kind of like the amount artists are so used to be able to fine tune things and tweak things. And, it's like if you don't, it just doesn't stack up financially anymore to have to do.
You can't really do it much.
Yeah. Kind of an interesting departure that we've been discussing that you've been doing recently is all the 7.1 live work for the Jamie XX Trio Codes Ballet and the Frank Ocean 7.1 stuff. Do you want to maybe talk us through that process and maybe give us some of the pitfalls of that?
So the first I'd never really done surround before, and then Jamie XX, who I'd worked with on his album and then was working with at the time on the XX album as well. He'd been commissioned to write a ballet score for this ballet called Tree of Codes. They had these amazing dancers from the company Wayne McGregor, which is a contemporary dance group in London, and the Paris Opera. So like full-on ballet people from that. And then this amazing lighting designer and sort of artist, Olafur Eliasson, who does these incredible things with like mirrors and lights. And because the way the ballet was, they wanted to experiment with it being in surround sound. So I was like, okay, this sounds... that was another case of just saying, okay.
Yeah, well, it goes back to they just say yes, even if you don't know.
Just say yes, and then I'll figure it. Yeah. So I just started reading up on surround sound, and but it was really quick. It had to be. The files arrived quite late, and I had 2 days to mix 90 minutes worth of music into surround sound.
Having not done it before.
Having never done it before. But it was. And they're quite complicated pieces. So. And I just got off a plane from LA, so I was jet lagged. But it was okay. I just went in the studio, we set it up. It's 7.1, but we're not using the center speaker because there's nowhere to hang that in the theatre. So it's essentially 6.1, but we're mixing because of the way Pro Tools works with its templates. We had to do it in 7.1,
right?
But just ignore the center speaker,
right? So what's involved with you when you're actually at doing live sound at the ballet?
Okay, so
Which sounds kind of weird, just seem saying that, really.
So I worked on. I got it sounding good in the studio, and then the first learning thing was taking it into an opera house. I was like, oh, okay, it sounds totally different now we're in this space, in like a much bigger space. Speakers are way further apart, so timing becomes an issue. So if you have like a click, and it's in a big space, it's a noticeable timing difference, depending on where you're sitting. And that became even more of an issue with the Frank Ocean, because he was doing festival headline slots in 7.1, so it's a huge field. It's like massive. But I'll get to that in a minute. But and also with the ballet stuff, you were in rooms that had really strong resonant frequencies, and they weren't built for sub-bass speakers. They were built for like orchestras, and so they have crazy resonances and dead spots. So it's a matter of, whenever it goes somewhere new, I open up the Pro Tools session, and you just play it out of the system. And yeah, a lot of it's making sure the movement within the room suits the size of the room. Some rooms are wide, some rooms are narrow, and it needs to be a good listening experience for wherever you're sat.
So it's quite a dynamic process then, so it's not a static process at all.
Yeah. Whenever it goes to a new venue, I go in and I tweak it. I spend a day in there just tweaking the mixes. And then when it comes to performance, I just press play.
And just and watch the dancers.
Yeah. I'm not there. I go to the opening night, and then it's left. Someone's pressing, someone else is pressing play on the phone.
All right. You seem slightly overqualified to press play.
Well, it's a bit of, I wouldn't, there's not much for me to do then. But yeah, it's I've learned so much from it, really, about how it was quite interesting, because once we started having run-throughs as well, I realised I had to pull back on some of the surround stuff, depending on what was going on stage, because if stuff was happening behind you, it may have sounded great in a studio, and it sounded great when we were testing it in the venue. But when you see it with the dancers, and you think, actually, this is pulling focus away from what's actually happening on stage at this point. So you have to sort of push it more to the front. And then there's other parts where, because of the nature of the lighting, it wants to feel more enveloping. So that's when you pull it out with the surround, even though it might not instinctively be what you do there. So it's sort of mixing it so it felt like it was part, and enhancing what was going on and adding to what was actually happening visually. Was a big part of it. And I learned loads from doing that. That when you're doing something like that, it's all got to sort of mash together. You can't just dictate it with the sound.
Yeah. So what were the issues with the Frank Ocean? Didn't you have to mix pretty much his whole back catalogue in
pretty much
7.1?
Yeah. Well, I got it all ready just in case.
Right.
And then for live, it sounded great in the studio. I was in LA with him, and it sounded really good. And then we hired a stadium to go and have a listen and play back.
as you do.
Because you have to. We didn't know what it was going to sound like and it sounded awful, because the timing was just all over the place. Because we had drums it sounded great in the studio, drums spinning around and back and forth. It's like, whoa, yeah, it's great. And it just sounded, this is all out of time. It's awful. So I had to just focus it all at the front. Anything rhythmical had to be at the front and nowhere else, because otherwise you just hear it twice, depending on where you're standing, with weird delays, and it was a mess. And then other stuff, some ambiences come around and sort of envelop you for certain parts. And again, it's the same thing about drawing focus away from what was happening on stage. And then in rehearsals, we spent a while in rehearsals in a huge space. Yeah. And
wasn't it another kind of really tight deadline and huge amounts of work?
Yeah, because I sort of reworked it all once I heard it in the space. It's like, actually, I'm going to do this all again. And but yeah, it sounded really good in the end.
Yeah,
and it's really And I went to the first few shows, and I'd be booked into a studio straight after the show, so I'd go tweak, run it all off for the next show, and
Oh man, so it's very much an ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually, the last few, it was all done. It was
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, but it was quite. It was a sort of dynamic process.
Yeah. So just we'll do a couple more questions, and then we'll do some Q&As.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots of questions people want to ask. So if you had to pick one, the most satisfying moment of your career to date, what would that be?
God, I don't know. It's. I mean, actually, I can't talk about it yet.
Oh, right.
There's some stuff coming out next year that I'm really excited by.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like working with someone like Frank Ocean is amazing.
Yeah.
He's like one of my favourite artists. I think he's one of like a great artist. That, and also things, getting to work with people on. Yeah, there's so many of the records I work on. I'm just really honoured to be working with.
I mean, apart from the records you can't tell us about, are there any other records that projects you're coming up that you're really excited about?
Yeah, there's some interesting. I actually just did an album with a Welsh artist called Gwenno.
Yeah, I know Gwen.
And but it's all in the Cornish language, which is, it must be the first album in the Cornish language. Well, for a long time, anyway. But,
this is where everyone thinks, is there a Cornish language? Well, she speaks Cornish. I've known Gwen for years, and she speaks Cornish at home with her father and her sister, and that's their language of choice at home. And it's like they speak Welsh, Cornish, and English, and it's mainly in Welsh. They mainly speak in Welsh and Cornish, and it's like,
I mean, there's probably like a couple of hundred people in the world that might speak Cornish, but it's it's a beautiful record. It's really
because her last album was incredible. I didn't even know till today that you actually mixed the new record.
Yeah.
It's like it's really really beautiful electronic record, and
it's really beautiful, and it's like I listen to stuff in languages I don't understand all the time. I always listen to Serge Gainsbourg or a lot of African music or Indian music, and I don't understand anything. I don't think it really matters.
No, I mean a lot of projects I've worked on in the last 5 or 6 years have been in non-English language projects, and you just discover that it's just. You get drawn to melody, you get drawn to and I did a lot of Welsh language records back in the 90s and early 2000s, and you just get kind of, apart from the obvious mistake of turning the vocal up too loud when you're mixing, to try and compensate for the fact you can't understand, once you get over that small bump, then it's actually this. I often find that actually watching the singers performing, if I'm recording them, and just making a note on the comp sheets if what their body language is like, and it's just find little ways around it. But it's just if the melody's great and it draws you in, it's like, and you feel that emotional connection. It's like doesn't matter what language it's in.
Well, Gwen, she was really good. She sent me notes on every track, which told me what she was singing about,
right,
and a translation. Yeah, so it's brilliant. I knew sort of vaguely what she was going for and what the song was about.
Yeah. And there are some parallels to Welsh.
Yes.
To Welsh
actually, I could vaguely understand some of it because I speak Welsh. So
yeah. Well, I'm really excited about that record because I loved her last record. It was fantastic. Yeah. And all the other stuff you told me about that I can't talk about either. I'm really excited about too. It'd be really good to sort of throw us out some questions. So who'd like to kick off? We got a mic somewhere because we're recording this for a podcast. So if who's on mic? Who's on mic, Judy? Right. Who wants to kick it off?
Hey, I'm very fascinated about what you said about FKA Twigs and the way that she worked, about how movement was a big part of her process. And I was just wondering if there are any other, maybe some of the more like self-produced artists. Are there any more that stand out to you in having a unique way of producing?
I sort of think most self-produced artists have something unique about them because they'll have come at it usually in a way that's not really been taught. So they've found their own way through it and their way of doing it. Like Dan from Caribou has quite an amazing way of working. But that's partly because he's such a good synth programmer. It's all played in and programmed so well.
Some sort of some crazy degree as well, isn't he?
He's a pure mathematician. He's a doctor of pure mathematics. And really, such full-on stuff. And there's a few of these people. Dave Glass Animals is a neuroscientist, and Sam Floating Point's a neuroscientist. Yeah, there's quite a few of these people who are just crazily intelligent people making music. Yeah, and then like maybe Jungle have quite a weird way of working, with these strange effects stuck on things, and their instruction to me on the first record was, you've got to mix it so it sounds like someone's thrown a blanket over the speakers. Just don't want.
That's a total antithesis to what you'd want to do.
Which is, and I was working in the same week. I was working on the Twigs record at the same, and it was like the total opposite. Because she was just like, make it really bright, and they were just like, we don't want any top end in this record. I had to fight for every bit of top end that's in that record.
I mean, how was it flick going between those? Was it like totally freak you out? This record's so bright. This record's really dull.
I quite liked it. It was refreshing to go back from one.
Yeah.
It was.
It's like, ooh, top end.
Yeah, and it's like, and with Caribou, there'd be things like having to recreate phases across the whole track, and that was. Yeah, we do loads of passes of phases and just listen to different phaser takes, which is the best phaser take.
Did you ever go back and use sort of like traditional tape phase?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have a 1/2-inch tape in the studio just for doing tape phasing.
I love traditional tape phase. It's not nothing else. There's nothing you can really do
it's
to
brilliant.
recreate that, and everything sounds like Ichiku Park. It's
It's
amazing.
so good.
Yeah.
So satisfying when you're doing it.
Yeah. Does that answer your?
Sure. Thank you.
Some more questions? Let me see those hands.
Hi.
Hi.
I was curious about your surround mixing. You were talking about the fact that you avoided the centre channel.
Yeah.
And what was the reason for that? And you were mentioning how you had problems with focus being drawn away from the stage. And I know that within mixing for screen, that we kind of use the centre channel to anchor things at the centre. But like you said, you kind of took a different approach. Could you tell me a bit about that?
It was purely practical on both times, in that because they were being performed on a physical stage and not a screen, there wasn't space in the venues to have a centre line array. Right. It would have broken up the visuals. So they just couldn't put one in. With the Frank stuff, I think there were some fills towards the front of the stage, but they were quite minimal compared to the line arrays either side and around. So with that one, I did use a tiny bit of, if there was vocals in, I'd put a little bit in there just to bring it to the centre. But with the ballet, I couldn't, because they just didn't have the space. There wasn't anywhere to hang them, because a lot of them, it's been in places like the Opera House in Paris, and there just wasn't anywhere to put centre arrays there. So it was purely out of practicality. It would have actually been easier to have that, but we just couldn't do it. So I had to work around it. They essentially wanted to be 6.1, but because the way the Pro Tools templates are set up, their 6.1 arrays didn't match what was happening in the venues. So using 7.1 but ignoring the centre and just being really careful with how stuff was panned was the only way of doing it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mixed a film for John Cale some years ago in 5.1. It's the first time I had any surround, and I really struggled with the centre speaker and and there was it was such an early stage of musicians using 5.1. It was really hard to know what to do, and do I put vocals in centre speaker? Do I put kick and snare in there? Do I treat it like a hard centre on stereo? And everything you try never sounded right, and everything sounded out of balance, and it took a lot of trial and error just to try and get it to sit right. It was I'm kind of glad 5.1 didn't really take off in music. I'm glad stereo is still it's tricksy. Mm-hmm. More questions? Esther, how was your flight?
It was good, thank you. I was just wondering, you mentioned something about creating space, particularly for Sampha's record.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you mean by creating space. Is it?
Yeah. So, yeah, often when I hear rough mixes, the thing that sort of the usual thing that I think is that it all sounds a bit clogged up, and it doesn't feel wide, or the vocal sounds too in with everything else, even though you want some of that. It'd be nice. I always like to be able to listen into a mix and hear everything if I want to hear it. And so a lot of the time it's about finding out what frequencies. So many things have frequencies in them that are around 200 to 400 hertz. Like most things seem to have something there. And so when they're all going together, there's often like this build up there, and it just makes things sound small or just clogged up. So a lot of it's figuring out, well, what's the most important thing around those frequencies? We let that, and various sort of frequencies within that. Or we'll maybe let the bass have that bit, that synth can have that bit, the vocal needs to have its warmth there. So, and then I'm often scooping bits of EQ out of other things that are in that area. So, in fact, most of the EQ I do is taking stuff out and mainly subtracting on EQ, and it's often around that area, pulling certain frequencies out, stopping booms in it. I use multi-band compression a lot as well, so that those frequencies are sort of there, but when they get too much, they're just held back. And then also like sort of stereo space around stuff, and reverb space and tails, and using different reverbs and delays so that things feel like they're a bit three-dimensional, that you work out what's leading where in the sort of stereo field and the sort of 3D field of the mix. I've got this weird
Go on.
I've sort of got this strange thing called synesthesia, where I see sound as like, if I just chill out a bit, I tend to see it as like really visual, colours and stuff. And it's quite weird with mixing. I can sort of, when it's all clogged up, it just looks wrong. It's quite sort of psychedelic, but I think a lot of people have it. It's just a blurring of senses a bit.
Right.
And a lot of people have it more if they take psychedelic drugs. It's
which obviously you
it's
never
sort of
do,
like
David,
no, but but it's sort of accentuated. But then sometimes it's just there, in people anyway. And so often what I'm doing is just trying to make it sort of look clear, feel clear, or just give it this sort of clarity going back, and then also in sort of that low mid area.
I mean, how early in the mix do you actually get everything in there? Do you start off with everything there and just start pulling out EQs?
Well, I'll have a listen with everything in to start with, and sort of note in my head what I think needs doing to it.
Yeah.
And then I'll usually build up in like probably what's a traditional way of rhythmical elements, so like drums, and then bass.
Yeah.
And then whatever is leading the bulk of the track, whatever instrument that happens to be, and then the vocal, and then extra things.
And we had an interesting chat earlier about the Goldfrapp record that you mixed, and how you actually went back to a lot of the earlier versions of the songs.
Yeah.
Because just and maybe just give us maybe have a quick chat about that, because it was actually quite interesting that there was you actually rejected some of the later versions of the songs.
Yeah, that was quite a complex process, but we sort of knew it was going to be when going in, because I'd normally say I budget a day a track when I'm doing a record of time, which I think, okay, well, like a 10-track record, that's 2 weeks' work, and with a few days to just tie it all up in the end. But with that, we'd already put a month aside for a 10-track record, so we knew it was going to be tricky. And they'd been working on it for a few years, and it had been through different they'd tried stuff with different producers.
All working on the same song.
On the same songs. Well, they'd done bits with various different people, mainly themselves as well, but they wanted to bring in other ideas towards the end just to hear how it was. And then when it came to me from just the last person that had done it, and we listened to it, and I'd sort of get a mix up, and they'd come and listen. But then we'd compare it back to other versions, and it's like, oh, actually, it's lost something. Let's go back to this. This version is where it's. So yeah, we were going back and forth all the time.
So how many years back were you, or how many sessions back were you going?
Oh, quite a few
Yeah.
in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we're going right back to early demos and going, look, it's lost this from that. Let's get those files in. So we were piecing it together from different versions of the track, and it was quite a long process on some of it, but it got there in the end. And it was quite good being objective, because often you just move forward and don't really go back and think, well, has it lost something?
Yeah. I mean, all the mix engineers I speak to who used to be tracking engineers or have done a lot of tracking, I think they found a real freedom in being able to mix other producers' material.
Yeah.
Because you're not so precious. You know, if you track something yourself, you get very attached to certain sounds and certain approaches. And I think it's not, mix engineers have that freedom that they can just pull things apart, and they don't feel that attachment that you do if you're a tracking engineer.
Yeah. Although I'm always really wary that I'm not making it worse than the rough mix.
Right.
And there's definitely, I have it on always have an A/B switch in the studio, and it's like rough mix and my mix. I'm always going back and forth between the two, and it's so often that it's like, actually, that's better on the rough mix.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back. That needs to go. You can't. And then sometimes you're like, okay, some rough mixes are just so bad you don't want to sound anything like them, and some are really good, but they're not quite right. So it's easy then to make it worse.
Yeah.
And So
Some more questions? Can we just get the mic to you? Yeah.
Specifically working with sort of self-produced artists, do you find yourself addressing arrangement quite a lot before you're mixing, and do you think that's an important part of getting a successful mix?
Yeah. I'll always say if I think an arrangement's not right. I mean, sometimes there's a sort of difference about sometimes I'm brought in to do like additional production and mix, in which case I'll always look at the arrangement. But then, if I'm feeling that something's not right in the arrangement or something's struggling, I'll definitely say. And sometimes people will be like, "No, we're happy with it like that." And I say, okay, well, that's cool. But and then often I'm asked to do a radio edit at the end as well, anyway, which is usually quite brutal to.
I guess it's quite tricky coming in late on, arrangement-wise, to get an artist to get so used to a certain arrangement of a song.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Well, actually, often what I'll do is I'll do a mix of the full arrangement I'm given, and then also I'll say, I've just done this edit, see what you think. And it'll be with the arrangement chopped up how I feel it was better. And it's usually just like 2 bars out here, 2 bars out there, where I feel it's like, it's just not doing anything at that point. It doesn't, it's not kicking in, it's not moving to the next thing quick enough, or it's not just getting into the track quick enough. And most of the time people are like, that just sounds more. Often it's better to just present both and say you choose.
You feel it's better to do it and then pitch it to them rather than sort of ask their permission.
Yeah, because I think if you have like, it can be too resistant sometimes. Some people are really open to it. Some people are just like, come on, edit it down, get it on the radio, I don't care. And other people are very precious about everything. But then when they hear it, just as an option, I think it's always the artist's record. So I'd never like really push against what an artist wants. I don't want to be someone. I don't take on records where I'm going to be like working on behalf of a record company to push an artist to do something they don't want to do. I totally avoid that. I hate that. And
whereas like a discussion,
and I didn't want to do it. So I always want to work with an artist to make the record that they want. And there's going to be stuff on every record that I'm unsure about. But that's the nature of it. It's an artist record. Yeah.
I mean, I was quite interested when we discussed this is about that you actually take on quite a small amount of work that you get offered.
Yeah.
Is it really because you need a connection with the artist?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
Because for a lot of producers,
Yeah.
it's really hard to understand the idea of turning down work is always, especially when you're starting off as a producer, it's a very hard thing to
Yeah.
do. But I guess you've got to get to a point where, you know, you've got to really believe in the artists you work with and the records that you're making.
I mean, I've definitely been lucky the last few years that there's a lot of work coming in,
Yeah,
and so I couldn't do it all anyway.
yeah,
And I think it's just important to do stuff that I'm excited about,
yeah.
and that I feel that I'm the right person for, and that me and the artist get on and have a, you know, feel that we can work together. I'll often do a trial mix if I'm unsure, just to make sure we get on right, and that I will, you know, I'm not going to be right for all records and for all artists, and even if I like it, and I've definitely got to like it, and you know, it's a lucky position to be in, and it'll, you know, it's just a period I'm in at the moment. In a few years' time, it might be very different, and I might be like trying to find work. You know, you just don't know.
I think you'll be fine, David.
We just don't know. You know, it's
No, I
like
wouldn't worry too
people
much.
come and go. I would never assume it. You know, so it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's all very cyclical, but
Yeah,
it's,
it
it's
is,
like.
yeah.
But I think once you've made that step and you've actually turned work down,
Yeah.
then it becomes easier to, you know.
It
and
does,
Then you
yeah.
start to decide. You find out what, as a producer, what the sort of projects you want to do.
It is a really interesting. When you first have to turn work down, it feels like, what am I doing? I'm turning work
Yeah,
down.
I would freak me out
Yeah,
totally when
it's
you
crazy.
know, it's like. But then you realise it's like the reasons you got into producing in the first place is because you want to work with artists you want to work with
Yeah.
who inspire you and who
Yeah.
sort of who you
Yeah.
you feel you can make good records for.
Exactly,
I think it's
yeah.
important to say, actually, I don't think I'm the right producer for this,
Yeah.
but why didn't you try this
Yes,
person?
exactly.
And once you cross that barrier, it's actually really quite freeing.
And actually, I've had an assistant for the last 3 years, Marta, and she's been brilliant. And she's now doing her own stuff. And she's just hit the point where she's having to turn work down. And she's like so freaked out by it. But she's just mixed the new Björk album, so she's going to be in demand.
No, she'll be
She's
fine.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So, you know, which is brilliant. So, yeah.
And you know, and it's nice to sort of you know, when you watch people you've helped you with their careers.
Oh, it's so brilliant
it's
to
really,
see what.
it's
Yeah,
actually
it's really exciting.
satisfying part.
Yeah,
of,
it is.
of
Yeah, it's
watching,
really good.
when you lose your assistants to sort of like the big producing job. You
Yeah,
know,
it's really good.
It's it actually is quite, you know.
Yeah.
Some more questions.
If you were to create a track from scratch, how much mixing would you worry about in the sort of producing process?
Okay, so I take on like 1 or 2 production jobs a year. So I've just done one now. I don't think I'll talk about it just yet, but I'm so excited by it, and they're brilliant. They're a really young duo, and yeah, it was quite interesting when I came to mix it. So this is half mixed, and so without realizing it, I think I'd been doing that, and it meant I could just mix like 3 tracks in a day because I'd sort of done most of it as I was going along, and just things like I tend to ride every word of the vocal with automation in a mix, and like quite really detailed. And I'd already done that when it came to mix, and just some of a lot of the little bits of EQs thing I was talking about. I'd been doing that as we were going along, so I knew what we were tracking, and so I do tend to. I like to work really fast when producing, but then at the end of every day I'll tidy up a bit and just make it so when we come back the next morning, and maybe first thing in the morning, have half an hour of just tweaking what the session is so it's sounding good, and I can have an idea of what I actually need to add, that we're not adding stuff just because it hasn't been balanced properly. And you know,
Were you tempted at any stage to actually get someone else to mix it?
no.
Yeah, I guess that kind of be a poor use of budget, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. But do you miss tracking?
I find that it takes up so much like emotional investment that I only want to do 1 or 2 a year.
Yeah.
I think.
Because I went the other way. I gave up mixing, and because I enjoyed the tracking process, and I haven't mixed a record for like 10 years now, and it's like, and I really enjoy that because guys like yourself always make it sound so much better than I ever would, and you get sort of guys like Tom Elmhurst and yourself and Spike Stent and stuff, and everything sounds great, So why would I want to try and mix it? Because they make it sound so great, and I do enjoy that. Yeah. The track, that being in the room with the artist all the time doing the thing, but.
There is something amazing about seeing a brilliant take go down. Yeah, that is one of the most special bits of the job, is when you're there and an artist, like maybe you have especially if you're doing it fully live with a band, a vocalist, and and it goes down. There's something really magical about that. And it's a rare thing. When you work, I do like working on sessions like that where it's very live, very real, and it's like there's something really magical about that. The build up to it, you can see it happening. Okay, this next take's getting better. There's some it's gone worse. Okay, it's about to come, and then they have this like amazing focus take, and you've got something special.
No, it is an amazing process. Some more questions, which we're good for time, so just.
So I'm going to come back again.
You're back.
Yeah, I just was interested in what you were saying about automating vocal tracks while you're mixing. Would you be able to go into more depth about what are you looking for and what are you, extending or pulling back?
I'm often looking for clarity, but without it sounding like it's been plonked on top of the mix, so that it's in there, but you can hear everything, and that the what's being said is clear, but it's not sounding separate from everything else. So a lot of the time, so I'll use, my usual chain would be some like EQ, usually rolling off like low end and just evening it out a bit. Some compression, something like an LA 2A, or if I want more sort of attack on it, like 1176 type compressor. Then often a multi-band compressor, so that I'm controlling any peakiness in the voice or any boominess, but still having that edge to it and the warmth. Then a de-esser, and then I'll automate. I'll just listen with it. I mean, I'll usually have some sort of reverb. Even if it's a really dry vocal, there'll be some reverb on it somewhere, probably, and maybe a tiny bit of delay. And then and sometimes even something like, actually the whole XX record, for instance, I ran every vocal through my H949, like the Eventide harmonizer, like an early harmonizer, just a few cents flat and a few cents sharp, and panned them left and right, and then had them really quiet under the vocal, but it just made them sound wider, and it filled out the track. I mean, the vocals are deliberately really loud on that record, so they're louder than I normally mix vocals, but we went for that as quite a sort of statement and part of the sound of it.
I guess there's so much space on an XX record as well. It's like
yeah, there is, and it's very much about the vocal performances and like how they sit. And actually, we had a real plate because we'd mixed that in rack, so everything went through the real plate. Right. And actually, I had an echo rec as well, like a Binson thing that was running stuff through. But
which room were you in at rack?
We were in 3.
Right.
Yeah, the Neve mixing room. Yeah. And
you didn't stay in the Mickey Most flat.
I stayed in the flat upstairs.
Because there's a flat next door.
Right, yeah.
And it's got like it's Mickey Mouse's old place from the 70s. It's got like shag pile carpet about this deep.
Amazing.
And it's got like gold dolphin taps.
Brilliant.
And a sauna
yes,
upstairs.
I saw the taps.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a bar in the corner.
It's amazing.
It's like you're walking back into like some sort of 70s kind of.
It's an amazing studio.
Oh, it's a great studio.
It's brilliant.
You've got those great old APIs in 1 and 2, and
it's a brilliant
a lot
place.
of amazing records would be done.
Oh yeah.
And it's nice and central, so so a real good in-town studio.
Yeah,
it's nice to have the budget to go to those sort of places.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that was. We spent a while in there actually.
Yeah, I spent about a month in there, and it was it was really good fun. Really good fun.
So then just back to you quick, and then And just sort of automate it so that it's often the ends of words that get lost, because like most vocalists dip off a bit at the end, so I tend to just rise them up a little bit so you get the clarity of what's being said. And if you just like lift the vocal up, I mean, to get the clarity in those without doing that, it's usually the vocals just lifted up or really compressed, like so it's overly compressed. So I like to have it so it still feels open, natural, but you're hearing the detail in it all. And often because of the amount of compression, you have to take the breaths down a touch at that point. And so it's just a matter of sculpting it into the mix, because the vocal seems to, I mean, it's usually the focal point of a track. And so that's the bit that's got to sound right. If something's wrong in a mix with the vocal, even someone who's just a casual music listener that's not really into music will probably notice it's wrong. So it's the bit you've definitely got to get right, because everyone just connects with it and relates to it.
Cool. Got any questions, Si? Do you want the mic?
Someone there as well.
Okay.
There's someone over there as well.
All right, cool.
In helping you convert audio information into visual information, would you say that psychedelics help your mixing?
I don't do psychedelics not anymore. Not like I haven't done for like 20 odd years. So, and that was happening anyway. It's just a thing some people have. Actually, Dave from Glass Animals has the same thing. And I can't remember. There's someone else.
I got a feeling that Lord might have senses.
Yeah, I think yes.
Yes,
I read an interview with her. Yeah. She was talking about it as well. Yeah.
I think it's more thing. Common than.
Yeah, it is quite common.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have it even with things like dates. They imagine them as this sort of visual thing, or just a sort of weird blurring of senses. But I think psychedelics for some people enhance it at the time of taking psychedelics. But I don't think I'd be able to mix on psychedelics. But I'm really sure.
I think the first thing to go when you're trying to cut back on any sort of like barriers between mixing and between recording, it's like I think mixing's the first thing you realise you need that clarity for. Yeah. I know for me that it was like, I cannot do it. I can't drink. I can't do anything. I'm trying to mix something.
I don't even have a drink. I can't drink one thing when I'm working. It's like nothing. I have to be really straight to be able to do it, because it's so detailed. And like I know that one drink, and even though I might feel sort of sober, I know my work isn't as good. If I listen to it the next day, it's not. This just affects the hearing too much.
Would you say that that's something that could be developed? The visual, being able to kind of visualize.
Actually, I mean, maybe, I don't know, actually. I know there's been quite a lot written about synesthesia as a thing. And I think it's probably possible with meditation would be the thing. I know a lot of people I know work, producers and mixers meditate quite a bit.
Dave Ringer, who was here for the last producer series, he meditates and plays a lot of poker.
Yeah.
In fact, he won a poker tournament on his way back from the producers. He stopped in Vegas on the way back and won a poker tournament. It's like,
But actually, meditation is quite good, I think, for just focus or for, and I can't work. I don't get into the studio and work 12 hours and go home. It's in bursts. Like, you can't focus for that. I tend to work in like 40, 50-minute bursts, and then 20 minutes off. I may just put on another record, do some emails,
nap,
go out and eat nice food, or just have a coffee, nap, or even like meditate. It's something just stuff, because you can't listen, and you make it worse after a while. I sort of know when I'm coming to a point of like, okay, I've got to like break from this now.
Thank you.
So don't do drugs, kids, especially when you're mixing. Got time for another few more questions? I've got,
easy, eh?
I'll come to you in a sec, Buzz.
Hi.
Okay, how are you?
Very good. I was just thinking, with mixing or with projects like recording, obviously the sessions can get really, really big. Like, you know, you might have 200 tracks or whatever, and you know, you might have 5 guitars, and each guitar has like 7 microphones or something. Do you prefer, when you're receiving a mix for, like, do you prefer the raw sessions, or would you prefer like stem sessions where someone, you know, if these self-producing artists might, you know, print the guitars, for example, into, you know, a stereo track or two mono tracks with all of those 7 mics already printed? What do you prefer?
Okay, so I often ask for options in that case, because I'll have had some phone calls with the producers, and yeah, I'm working on a record like that now, and we've just gone through lots of options. So I ask for like a bounced version, and then in a separate folder for there to be the dry separates. But the key is how they're labelled, so I can find them easily. As long as everything's labelled clearly.
Not audio 1 to
Yeah.
54.
Yeah. Which is how I label stuff when I'm doing my own music.
Right.
And how my assistants always just tell me off. But yeah, it's all about that. And then, or often what I'll ask my assistant to do when they're prepping is have the wet version and then hidden inactive tracks below it of the raw parts. So if I listen to it, I'll be like, something not right about that. I need to get into that one to do something. Then I'll lift up the raw tracks and I'll work from them. Yeah. But if I think, oh no, that's fine, it just needs some EQ on it, it's cool. I'll work from the sort of bounced version of it. So it's just a matter of having options, really. I think, yeah, that's generally.
I mean, if you know, as an artist, if you can commit sonically to something, it makes everyone's job down the road easier. Yeah. It's like, you know, it's definitely the curse of modern recording. It's actually, you know, there's a lot of subtraction rather than, you know, it's you know, I mean, I started, you know, I'm sure Dave was the same. You know, started making records on 16 track, and the drums would be on 4 tracks, and the bass on 1, and guitars on 2, and you know, and it's like, you know, and it's because you've committed the recording stage. And it's really good if you can actually, as an artist, you can commit to, you know, it's like.
Yeah, I remember doing that. I remember like making records on tape where if you knew there were going to be strings and things on, you'd do them early on. So you could record them across a few tracks and submix to a stereo and commit, and then you'd wipe them. Yeah. You know, and it'd be. And we do there's a lot, a ton of backing vocals. Yeah. Like all those Derrera recordings we did on 16 track, it was like, you know, that we do backing vocals pretty early on in the stage because it was not the tracks to actually, you know, you have to maybe put a guide guitar down and then stick all the backing vocals on and then start retracking everything. It's like, because when you're out of tracks, you're out of track. I remember Tim Lewis telling me a great story about he was recording at Loco Studios and they'd used up all 24 tracks on the machine. And they were like, "Can we put this one extra overdub on?" And he said, "I'm sorry, we've used all the tracks." And the manager took him aside and said, "Look, if I give you 20 quid, can you find another track?" And it was like, you know, it was like, I mean, we were pretty limited. You know, you were stuck with what you had, and you had to figure out ways to sort of work around. I remember putting stuff on live in a mix.
I remember Griff
because we'd run out of tracks.
I remember Griff from the Furries telling me that he put the guitar part down during the cut to vinyl. Yeah, he was in the cutting room with playing guitar down on, you know. It was like the things he used to have to do. It was like it was out of necessity. And we should probably, I mean, just quickly, we should probably touch on mastering quickly as well. I mean, you know, I would presume you have like a group of mastering engineers you particularly like to use. Yeah. And are you, like myself, adamant that if you're mixing the track, you should probably get someone else to master it, just to have another set of ears?
Yeah, it's quite. Yeah, it's so weird how all that happens, because obviously these days we always I can't hand in mixes to a label with no limiting on, because they're just going to be, this is all quiet, it sounds crap. And so you have to do like a rough master whenever you send anything in anyway as a mixer. But you've always got to make sure you leave enough headroom that the mastering engineer can improve upon it, or can make. If you hand it in crazily loud, then you know, there's nowhere for anything to go, because labels will just go, yeah, but yours were louder than the master, you know, and then you've got this battle, and it's like just goes back and forth. I mean, sometimes with rough mixes, I have to say, look, my mix is not as loud as your rough mix. But your rough mix is distorted to hell. So I can't I just can't compete with that. I have to. If you want it that loud, that's a big decision. But you're going to have to just balance these when you A/B and listen, because it's not a fair comparison otherwise.
Yeah.
But it's interesting actually. With I did an album with Philip Selway from Radiohead, his last solo album, and we'd worked on it, and I'd done like a rough master so he could listen to and play the label. And it came to mastering, and we did it, and it was like, and then we did revision notes, and eventually he just said, I just don't like it compared to the one that you did, even though it had taken me 20 minutes and it was rough.
Right.
It's just like, to him, that was the record. That's how it should sound, because that's how he'd listen to it, and it's one of those sort of rare things where sometimes by accident you just nail it without even thinking about it. It's like just a rare thing. So that's what we ended up using.
Right.
We just got mastering engineer to like lift the level of it a touch. But it was just, that was, to him, that was the album. And it did sort of sound good. It worked somehow.
Do you tend to mix with a certain mastering engineer in mind?
No, I just mix with the artist and the tracks in mind, and then figure out. I've got like 4 or 5 mastering engineers that I work with regularly, and I know.
Do you think that relationship's important to have that relationship with? I find that if you can discuss projects with a mastering engineer, it just just that communication process. I think.
Yeah, I think it's good, and just to know what they're going to bring to it, and for them to know what you're after as well.
Yeah.
Because we'll have done a few records together. They'll know that I won't want more 3K added in.
Yeah.
Because I'm always really it drives me nuts when stuff comes back and it's just got this 3K in it. It's like, and that they'll also know that I don't want the subs rolling off. Also, that to my, if I'm mixing a project, there's certain things that I'm always gonna, and I don't like too much top end in it. I don't like hyped top end. Quite open, and that usually what I'm looking for from mastering is just something to add cohesion to the record. And I mean, sometimes you're surprised because you go, that really sort of added to it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, I'm really aware that we've spent so much time on it anyway.
Yeah.
It's mostly about getting the record to sit, and it should be really subtle. I wouldn't be sending a track off to mastering if I thought it needed much. I'd try and fix that at the mix.
It's that key of not using mastering as a catch-all to try and fix bad mixes, isn't it? You've just got to.
It's got to sound good. You've got to pretty much think it's done before it goes to master. It shouldn't be.
And the only issue you get then is when the artist is presented with a bill for mastering. It's like, well, it sounds the same as the. Is there any difference? And it's like, yeah.
I mean, sometimes, it's that sort of just extra gel, and I like having another set of ears on it. Yeah,
for me, that's that's a really important part of that process.
And the vinyl cut is a thing. Like a good cut to vinyl sounds brilliant.
I mean, there is this kind of misnomer that you can just use the original master, and then you get masters that are done, proper master cuts, and it's like it's just chalk and cheese. It's so much better.
Yeah,
but it is a big extra expense. And for a lot of new artists, it is actually, it is an issue.
But with the vinyl boom, there's so many pressing plants that they just cut it direct metal, and it doesn't sound good. I'll listen to it, and this doesn't sound right. Yeah. It'll come out, and I'm never going to listen to the vinyl of that. And people are paying twice the price of the vinyl. Yeah. And it just doesn't sound as good as the download. Yeah. And then it sounds if it's cut properly, it sounds fantastic. Yeah. It sounds really good, really alive, really there. And it's so there's a real difference with that.
I used to really enjoy going into sort of the cutting process, and I'm sitting there with the guy with the lathe, and there's something really kind of primal about it. It's it's pretty special. Yeah. Very special process. Buzz, you had a question, I believe.
Hi, David. My name's Buzz. I'm quite interested in all the stuff you've talked about sort of managing yourself or managing your perspective. as you're working on stuff. For instance, like you might have a nap to refresh your brain, or you might use that A/B thing, comparing a different mix to keep your perspective fresh, or you might put a song on loop and listen to it in a different way, not so intense. And even stuff like you were doing those playful mixes to see if anything magic happened, and then you would cut that into the mix, just using different methodologies. Even things like where you say, don't try and second guess what the client wants, do it so that you've actually got a self-awareness thing going on there. I'm not going to fall into their thing, and or even not drinking.
Yeah.
All of that stuff where you're managing yourself. Do you? I'm just interested if there's more of that stuff. Do you do much outside of the studio to make what happens in the studio good? I mean,
actually, yeah. It took me till I was 40 to realise I should exercise.
Yeah, right.
I waited till I was 50, so it was like, it does happen eventually.
And then I realised how good it was. If I go to the gym 3 times a week, I'm way more productive in my work. It's just good. It's like, because your body feels good, your mind feels, they all play into each other.
It's the new rock and roll, David.
Yeah.
Gyms are the new rock and roll.
It was quite a revelation. My dad was a sportsman, so I'd rebelled against him. I was like, I don't have anything to do with that. But, yeah. And just, I think, actually, a serious point with most people that work in studios, it's an unhealthy lifestyle if you're there all the time. It's not really good, and it can be mentally unhealthy as well. And I know so many people that have been through burnout or sort of depression from just spending way too much time in a darkened room, just focusing and going a bit mad with it all. So I think it is important to look after yourself outside of the studio and to have a life, and to even though you work crazy hours and you sometimes really have to push, and there's been periods where probably the balance hasn't been good, and I've just had to focus on work to get through things. But it definitely comes at elements of personal cost. But I think it is important to make sure you have a life outside the studio. And I really like going to gigs and seeing the bands that I've worked with play, and to see the reaction of audiences to the music I've been working on. It brings it home as to what it is you're doing, and you're making something for people to connect to. It's not just like a technical job at all. It is music's about emotion and about affecting people and being emotionally moved by it and being excited by it, making you dance, making you move, feeling various things. And I think it's really important to remember that that's what music is, and to keep connecting to it in that way. But also, going out and just having time away from the studio that isn't, I make sure I have friends that have nothing to do with music, so I can go and just not talk about music for an evening. It's good.
Well, it's probably a good note to wrap it up there. But thanks so much for coming over and working on.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we've got some days in the studio now to work on some songs, and it's just it's so brilliant to have you here and pass on your knowledge, and and just to have a fellow Welshman here. It's I kind of miss Wales a bit.
Yeah.
I miss the mountains. And well, thank you all for coming, and we will at some point podcast this or put it on YouTube, so you can review anything. And this is intended to be an annual event, so we'll bring producers over here each year. So I'm presuming Recording Music New Zealand will still help me out next year. Dean, please. And thank all the sponsors, and thank all the guys at Roundhead for putting this on, and a big hand, please, for the amazing David Wrench.
Thank you.